Chapter 5. 5:30 came early, and Tuck thought that he had just closed his eyes when the alarm went off. Truthfully, he had sat up with Hannah until after midnight, after they talked to her father about her staying over in a spare berth space below decks. It seemed more practical that way, and less dangerous for her to spend the night there and get an early start in the morning. Tuck fired up the coffee pot, and then took a quick shower while it brewed. After dressing in his work uniform, Tuck tended to his devotions that Hannah's dad had started him on 6 months before. Afterward, he filled his to-go mug, looked in on his sleeping fiancée with a big grin, and headed to his truck. Today would be a long, depressing day as he and Bob worked the animal attack scene. Any time a wild animal loses its fear of man enough that it will kill and eat him, the situation needs to be resolved quickly with the death of that animal or animals. Tuck allowed his mind to wander as he made the drive back to the PD river to meet Bob. He had not worn the issue 9mm Glock today, preferring the heavy punch of the .45 ACP loaded with Winchester hollow points in his old custom P90 Ruger DA, if something else showed up while they were looking around. Bob was already there when Tuck arrived, but had stayed in his truck. As Tuck walked toward him, Bob got out and gave him a loud, "Good morning. I brought some coffee and donuts. Don't know when we'll get lunch today." "I can always use some coffee, but if you keep eating those donuts, you'll have to apply for a city cop's job down in Myrtle Beach," Tuck replied with a big grin. He and Bob worked well together, and although Bob was a ranking officer, he and Tuck had a relationship as equals in the field. "How did it go with Hannah, or shouldn't I ask?" Bob asked with a big grin. "Did she turn your sorry butt down?" Tuck tried to act insulted, but it was hard to hide how happy he was. "No, she didn't turn me down. She did say that you were in big trouble for the ill-timed phone call, though," he said laughingly. "Well, let's get down there and look around before the boys get here and muck the place up," Bob replied, as they walked slowly along the line that Val's truck took when it left the road. "Hey, I see you're packing the showstopper, Tuck," as Bob noticed the heavy stainless pistol on Tuck's belt. "Expected trouble?" "Last night I had a distinct feeling that something was watching me when I went in there. A deer spooked over to that side and scared the crap out of me, but you never know. That deer didn't eat Val Simmons," Tuck replied. The two men separated a few feet and started studying the ground of where the body was found. Any tracks had been obliterated by the crowd that had been there yesterday, so they moved in the direction that Tuck had heard the growl. "What kind of noise was it?" Bob asked. "I thought I heard a very low growl, almost like something clearing its throat. Certainly wasn't a dog, but maybe a bear, although I've never heard one of those either," Tuck responded. As he moved to where the sound had come from, Tuck saw that the leaf mat had been disturbed like a large animal had moved there. "Bob, over here, I think I might have found something," he called. Kneeling down carefully, Tuck put his hand in the indentation that he had found, and even though his hands were wide, about 4 inches across, the track was about 2 inches wider than his hand. "Try and uncover that if you can," Bob said, but there was no definition to the track that would tell them what made it. Had to be a bear, nothing else would make a track that wide. "Well, if it was a bear, where are the claw marks and the rest of the tracks? It didn't just fly in here, did it?" Tuck knew he was being sarcastic, but this was a real puzzle. "Where did you see that deer last night?" Bob asked. "Let's see, I was facing into the swamp, shining my light across here, when I heard the twig pop about 20 feet in that direction," Tuck responded, indicating back toward the road from where they stood. Both men moved slowly toward the area that Tuck had indicated, careful not to disturb the ground in the chance that there might be a track. "Well, we should see where that deer ran into the swamp. There'd be no hiding those pointed feet coming down in the leaves, but I don't see anything that would indicate that a deer was here. Hey, look at this cat vine." There, about 3 feet off the ground, was a tuft of tawny brown hair that is stuck into the thorny vine. "Looks like a deer might have jumped through this thicket," Bob continued, "but where are the tracks?" Tuck took the tuft of fur in his hand and rubbed it between his fingers. It's definitely not deer. This is soft, not deer at all. Let's take it back and have someone look at it. Deputy Baumgartner had arrived with the forensics team in tow, so the two wardens walked back to the car to talk to him before leaving. As Ike was getting out of his patrol car, he stopped suddenly and reached for the radio mic on his shoulder. Bob and Tuck could not make out what was being said, although they could see that Ike was agitated by the transmission. "What's up, Ike?" Bob asked. We've had another killing, Bob, an old woman up Lucas Bay Road. It looks like coyotes killed her goat and her sometime last night. A neighbor went over to check on her this morning and found what was left. Tuck, you follow Ike up there and make a report. I'm going back and see if we can't get a state hunter in here to have a look," Bob said quietly. 2 days and 2 humans killed. I've never seen anything like it. Me either, Bob. How about running this fur by the lab when you go in? It might give us a lead. I'll call in as soon as we get a look at the scene. Ike, I would appreciate if you would call ahead and tell the fellows already there not to touch or move anything until we get there, Tuck said with a voice of authority that neither Bob nor Ike had heard before. He was on a mission again, and it felt good. As they pulled up at the secluded old trailer, 2 other sheriff's deputies were there, and a county coroner's vehicle along with the WLIB news vehicle with its antenna mast extended, and a very distraught newswoman sitting in a side drawer. She obviously had been crying, and some of her vomit had matted her long red hair. She barely looked up as the 2 men walked past, and they were both relieved not to have to talk to her. "Well, it looks like the cat is out of the bag now for sure," Ike whispered to Tuck, who responded with a grimace, not knowing just how prophetic Ike's words were. "I'm afraid that it is, and our folks will certainly not be too pleased to have the public know that wild animals attacked 2 humans in 2 days. They walked over to the deputies for a briefing. The youngest, David Tripp, had red eyes and had apparently been crying. "Millie was like his grandma," Ike explained. "This is going to be tough for him." The young deputy, who was so visibly upset, said to both of them, "I can't go back in there again. Millie was the sweetest old woman in the world, and I don't want to see her like that again." With that, he went back to his car. Ike and Tuck followed the other deputy around the trailer and back to the goat pen. Tuck had seen carnage during his service time, but Ike was ill prepared for what they walked into. Every goat that was in the pen had literally been torn into pieces, their body parts partially eaten and strewn around both inside and outside of the pen. To their right, Millie's torn remains were scattered about as well. All of the ground in and around the pen was covered with dog tracks that Tuck knew to be coyotes. He called the coroner over, a thin, tired-looking fellow that had seen more than his share of other people's tragedy. "Hey, Eddie, have you seen anything unusual on that body?" "You mean anything besides being eaten by a dog?" was the reply. "Yeah, anything besides a dog," Tuck said quietly. Eddie thought for a few seconds, then he said, "The only thing that wasn't chewed or ripped is her head. How's your stomach?" Tuck had seen the remains of one suicide bomber that had detonated prematurely. His head was sitting in the dirt in the middle of the road about 50 feet in front of where the bomb went off. The body had been scattered into chunks. "I could stomach it," he said as he walked over to the sheet that had covered most of Millie's upper torso, including her head. Eddie pulled the sheet back so that Tuck could look at her, and the first thing he noticed were the forged large puncture wounds in the nape of the neck at the base of her skull. "Those are not dog teeth," Tuck exclaimed. "She was dead before they got here. Eddie, I need for these remains to be taken to the medical examiner as fast as you can get this site cleaned up." Tuck turned to Ike Baumgartner. "What kind of animals do we have here that leave those kinds of wounds, Ike? Have you ever heard of something like this happening before?" The deputy had been around Conway all of his life and had grown up hunting the fields and swamplands surrounding the Waccamaw and Petey rivers. "I've heard there were trail cam pictures of big bears and some panthers in places that you wouldn't expect, but I've never seen them. Some of the men that I know have stories, but you know how that is. There's never any proof." Tuck finished up with Ike and had started back to Conway to meet Bob so that they could get back on their patrol schedule. Little did he know that a hornet's nest of trouble was already brewing, and both he and Bob had stepped right in the middle of it.